and welcome to the Victorious Living Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Nikeya Young, and I am so excited about today's show. We have with us in the studio none other than Dr. S.L. Young. Everyone, give him a hey. I feel like I need to have the little. You guys, let me read this man's bio for you. So, Dr. S.L. Young is a multi award winning educator, social entrepreneur, mental health advocate, program executive, author, writer, former HuffPost contributor, professor, inspirational speaker, and former radio host. Dr. Young's thought provoking materials provide solution oriented guidance to address life and business challenges. In 2018, Dr. Young received special recognition for his work educating over 500 incarcerated individuals. The first is the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drum Major Innovative Service Award from the U.S. Department of Education for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships in collaboration with the White House Initiative for Educational Excellence for African Americans. The second is the Distinguished County Service Award from Volunteer Arlington, a program of the Leadership Center for Excellence. Dr. Young is also the founder of the nonprofit organization Saving Our Communities at Risk Through Educational Services, an acronym Socrates, which teaches individuals in opportunity at-risk communities about life, business, and soft skills. Dr. Young's for-profit company, Beyond SPRH LLC, provides solution-oriented services to help individuals and organizations maximize output potential. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. S.L. Young.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad we're finally able to connect.
Me too. Me too. So, you guys, we're going to jump in here. The topic for today's show is surviving workplace bullying. As you all know, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about surviving toxic relationships. I'm devoting a whole season to this topic because it is very near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about different ways that toxic relationships show up, families, workplace environments, I don't know, churches, love relationships, all of the above. So just sit tight, tune into this episode, and then go back and watch the ones you missed. So today we're talking about workplace bullying. It has happened so much, and it happened so much that we had a great resignation during the pandemic. I think that whole time period caused people to really realize the impact that their workplaces had on them because they were forced to sit home. And then when they were faced with the prospect of going back, they realized, I don't want to go back. So, this topic we're going to get into, Sly has experience with workplace bullying. And just sum up for our listeners, basically, what was your experience? What happened? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I've worked with individuals who I would say aren't necessarily secure with themselves because a lot of times people bully others because they're not secure with themselves. But
Mhm.
I've also dealt with bullies who were individuals who were unethical. And so for me, dealing with the traditional type of bully, just the little things that they do, that wasn't the issue. But when people asked me to do things that were against my morals, my ethics, and my values, that's where I drew the line. And I said, I'm not going to do these things. So instead of organizations addressing the things that I identify, I ended up walking away because I didn't want to be a part of the things that they were doing because I knew that if I changed myself and went along with the things that they wanted me to do, then that changed who I am as a person and
Mm,
who I would be in the future.
yeah.
And it's always easier to look back and say, you know what? I like the decisions that I made and the person that I am today because what I stood for. Sometimes the consequences of taking actions
Mhm.
can have a negative impact, but I'd rather have the negative impacts of doing the right thing than to have the negative impacts of doing the wrong things that could end me up in jail.
Hmm. Talk about it. So I watched you on, I think it was the Dr. Phil show,
Yes.
and you had a very powerful testimony about supervisor. And I know there's a lot of people, most people who deal with workplace bullying, it's usually from someone they directly report to. And that can get really hairy because people are less likely to speak up in those instances because it's like, oh, if I say anything, I'm going to be fired. But what did you do in that scenario?
Well, it's really a personal choice
Okay.
whether you're going to take action because you can choose to stay in the environment and be abused. And
Mhm.
then what impact does that have on you? You're
Yeah.
miserable going to work. It's probably going to impact your life outside of work. It might impact your relationships. Or you could say, my life is worth more than this. And I'm not going to stay in a toxic environment that's going to have a negative impact on me, potentially mentally, physically, emotionally. And so you have to make a choice. What am I willing to deal with? And for me, it was an easy choice, my sanity over somebody else's insecurity.
Mhm.
And I chose to walk away. However, I didn't realize that in doing this in several organizations that I worked at as a consultant, that it would lead to me not having gainful employment and lead to me not being able to pay my bills and nearly ending my life because the other challenge that we have is that individuals don't like to share what's going on because people
Mhm.
say that they're weak, but they don't realize the strength that it takes to walk away from a bad situation
Yeah.
because it's easy to stay. It's harder sometimes to walk away. And so I made the decision that I wasn't going to become somebody else by allowing somebody else's choices to dictate who I would be or even worse, who I would become.
Mhm.
So sometimes you just got to say, make the choice for you. I'm going to make the best decision for me, even if it might have an immediate negative consequence. But I always say that the biggest test of whether you've made a good decision is years later,
Mhm.
is when you look back and you say, I made this decision. This was the outcome of it. And for me, it was a very negative outcome that led to me nearly ending my life, that I'm still okay with the decision that I made. And better yet, I would, even knowing that all these negative things happened to me during the course of my journey based on the supposedly right decisions that I made, which they were the correct decisions,
Mhm.
I would make the exact same decisions all over again, even though that I would nearly end my life as part of the process. So for me, I'm secure. But one of the things that I also tell everybody is, and this was really important for me because people often talk about authenticity and vulnerability. They talk about it, but a lot of these folks that are out here talking about it, when have you really done that truly? For
Mhm.
me, I've done it. I've went against the grain, and where a lot of people are going out on social media and putting the best parts of their lives out there, I put the worst parts of my life. I said, here it is. This is what happened to me. This is my
Mhm.
true story, whether you like it or not. But in reclaiming my power by owning my story, what I tell folks is once you own your story, no one owns you.
Mm. I like that. Once you own your story, no one owns you. So
Absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about, you said you almost ended your life, but that wasn't due to the job. It was due to, just to clarify, the financial impact after you walked away.
Actually, it's a combination of both
Okay.
because the actions that occurred at the job led me to walk away from several jobs that
Uh,
led to me losing income, losing savings, and basically not having a penny in my pocket.
mm,
Then I was summoned to go to debtor's court. And that was the moment that broke me because I said I did everything that I was supposed to do. I stood up against people who were doing the wrong things. We're often told in our families, in our churches, and schools, and organizations, stand up against wrong people. Sorry, people that are doing wrongful acts,
yeah.
and make sure that you do the right thing. Well, I did all of those things, and then I couldn't get employed anywhere, and I lost everything, so that has an impact on your psyche. So for
Yeah.
me, when the depression hit, I didn't even know what depression was because I had heard the term, but it never happened to me. But
Yeah.
when you're starting to go through it, you realize something's different, but you don't necessarily know what it is. But the moment that I nearly ended my life, I wasn't planning it. I hadn't even thought about it. I woke up that day and it was just inside of me. So oftentimes folks will say, "Oh, well, I didn't see it coming." Well, I'm telling
Mhm.
you, neither did I.
Yeah.
And had I not had something that I cared about more in the moment, which was my mother, I wouldn't have made that last phone call because what I had realized at that point, and I've heard people say this before, but I never realized it or the impact of it when I've heard people say, "I'm worth more dead than alive." And I
Mhm.
literally was, because if I died, there was my life insurance. If I lived in that moment in my mind, I had nothing else left to live. But the
Wow.
important part of my story is, and fortunately, I did make that last call because I had something that I cared about, because I called my brother Johnny, and I basically just wanted assurance that if anything happened to me, that our mother would be taken care of because I was the primary caregiver.
Yeah.
I That was the only thing that I cared about. But in having that call, I started to break down, not that I was planning to, because I just wanted to make my statement, get off the phone, and end my life. And I started to break down. He started noticing that something was different, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Well, what's going on?" And then I hung up the phone, but he kept calling back. He wouldn't give up until I finally called back. And what he probably doesn't know, and I don't know if I've ever even said this before in any interview, is that I was on the tip of a needle and
Mm.
making that decision whether I wanted to live or die. And it was it was a really touch and go moment, and one of the things I write about in my books, because I wanna talk about the experiences openly and honestly, because I know in telling my story, it can help somebody else,
Yeah.
because there was a moment when I was on death's door by my own choosing, where I heard the devil's voice in the room with me saying, "Do it, do it, do it." I heard a rhythmical chant in those final moments that I was right ready to die.
Mhm.
And my brother said to me, "You write about all these positive things.
Mhm.
Why don't you use your own words to save yourself?"
Wow.
And there was something about that moment that shook me back to reality. But more importantly, he didn't come in saying, "What are you doing? You shouldn't do this." He took a different approach. He
Mhm.
took an approach of, "What's going on? You know, think about this moment." So he was trying to reel me back
Yeah.
where I was in a spiral out of control. But I think if he would have come in saying aggressive, assertive things like, "What are you doing? You're a, this isn't something you should do. Normal people don't do this." That might have sent me in the opposite direction and might have solidified my decision to end my life.
Yeah.
But that's why we need to be careful when we're having conversations generally, but specifically when somebody's in in a moment of conflict
Yeah.
within themselves. Um, you have to be mindful of the words that you use, because you never know what's going on in somebody else's mind or in their life.
Mm. That's very key. Very key. What would you say after, that conversation with your brother? Of course, you decided not to, thank God, you decided not to end your life, but what would you say was some of the things that you did to help come back from that level of despair and begin your road to recovery mentally?
Well, the first thing that I did after I spoke to my brother, he encouraged me to speak to one of our other siblings, my sister. And that moment of just starting to open up
Mhm.
and tell other people was going on, because before I thought being a man or being a
Mhm.
strong person meant you held it to yourself
Yeah.
and you didn't tell anybody. That is absolutely crap.
Mhm.
Being strong is being able to tell what's going on. I actually, even before I go into like what helped me move forward, I actually had a situation earlier, probably years earlier. I was in my classroom at the end of the semester, and a bunch of students just suddenly started giving me appreciation,
Hmm.
and it actually touched me, and I started to get emotional.
Hmm.
And instead of allowing myself to get emotional, which emotions are human, they're part of the human experience, they're
Mhm.
normal. I started fanning myself with a sheet of paper. I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's getting hot in here. It's getting hot in here." Because I didn't want them to see my emotions that they were impacting me. But afterwards, I said to myself, "What did you just do?
Hmm,
Your students were letting you know that they appreciated you. You were having an emotional response because they touched you because you didn't realize the impact that you were having.
mhm.
But at a moment when you should have embraced the joy and happiness of that moment that they were sharing with you, you blocked your ability to fully embrace and
Yeah.
experience that moment of happiness."
Wow.
And at that moment, I said, I wouldn't do that anymore. I wouldn't worry about what anybody else thought, whether I cried or not, whether I was being a man. Men should have emotions just like anyone else.
Mhm.
Show your emotions. Being a man is being comfortable with yourself, that you're saying, I don't care if I cry in front of somebody else. So that experience, as I was starting to move forward, actually helped me.
Mm,
Because what I realized is that I was having an emotional breakdown. I was having a mental crisis that needed to be addressed. And I'm a very critical thinker. So I was like, well, if this wasn't me, what would I do? And
yeah.
so I started looking at it from an outsider's perspective, in which I decided to just start writing about the things that happened to me. And it sort of happened in phases because I had the conversation with my brother. He encouraged me to have a conversation with our sister.
Mhm.
And then the cavalry is coming in. And
Yeah.
then I called a good friend and I said, this is what's going on right now. And this good friend said to me, he said, you were supposed to go to the jail today. You need to go. I'm like, I can't go to the jail like this.
Hmm.
And unbelievably, 4 to 5 hours after I nearly ended my life, I got up to go to a jail to go teach inmates. I didn't get in that day because it was on lockdown. But that day changed my life because it gave me something of value and of
Yeah.
purpose, and it gave me hope, and
Hmm.
it told me that I still had something to offer. And 1 week and 1 day later, I was actually scheduled, to speak at a healthy living series, ironically. A local library had contacted me the month before, and they asked me if I'd like to speak at the event because they had read something I wrote on my new blog that I had created. I think I started in August of 2013. And they basically said, we would like you to speak at our healthy living series. And I said, well, what would you like me to speak about? They said, I don't know. What would you like to speak about? I said, belief. And they're like, belief. That's an interesting topic. I said, okay, I'll speak about it. Incredibly, 1 week and 1 day after I nearly ended my life, I delivered a presentation at a local library. It's on my website, or you can search on the internet for it. But there's a presentation, belief, a powerful component of success.
Hmm.
And after I finished that presentation, the person that was recording it for me, I said, there is something different about this one. I don't know what it is. But it took me a while to realize that I was standing in front of a crowd, but I was having a conversation with myself, trying to believe
Hmm.
in life.
Wow.
Excuse me. And so at that point, I decided that I needed to capture what I was going through while the feelings were raw. So I wrote a book. It's called Choosing to Take a Stand Changed Me, My Life, and My Destiny. And I wrote that book the following month. And I'm actually getting ready to read it again now that I've accomplished some
Mhm.
greater heights that I never imagined. But one of the chapters in that book that wasn't there, it was scheduled to be there, but ended up being there later. There's a story behind that, but that's for another day. And but there's a chapter that's called Happiness. Happiness isn't what I thought it would.
Hmm.
And sometimes when we go through challenging moments and times, it is actually the universe shaking us up and moving us in a different direction.
Yes.
Years ago, I read or watched a video. There was a quote that from Tyler Perry. He had a little video vignette, and he said, "Sometimes God closes all the doors to force you to go in one direction."
Yes. That is so
And
true.
and that happened for me because it changed my focus and my direction. So I started writing about all these things that were happening to me. And as I wrote the first book, I gave it to a friend and she read it and she said, "What are you doing? This is your personal business. Why are you sharing this with the world?" I said,
Mhm.
"Because it's a powerful story that I think could help somebody else." And had I listened to her, I wouldn't have
Hmm.
put that information out there.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that helped to save me because once I started writing more about it on my website, the HuffPost saw my articles and then they
Wow.
contacted me and
Okay.
they asked me to be a contributor. Then I started writing more about what was going on. And as I wrote more, some amazing things happened. One, friends and family started confiding in me that they had similar struggles
Hmm.
and that my story was giving them hope. My story told them that it's okay to share their story. My story gave them the belief that if they stayed around another day, things could get better. I
Yes.
had family members who lost loved ones who contacted me to say, now, and one of the most powerful ones was a mother who contacted me and said her brother ended his life years ago. Now she understood why he made that final phone call.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing connections that came out of me telling my story is around the first year after I nearly ended my life, I wrote an article on the HuffPost that was, I think the title of it is Letter to Myself a year after my near suicide or something like that.
Yeah.
And a mother in Vermont read that article and she contacted on my website and she said that the article was very impactful for her because it helped her to understand what her son's final moments might have been like.
Wow.
That mother,
Ooh.
um, Mrs. Hanson, who lost her son Brian, the two of us started connecting
Mm.
and we started emailing each other. And then a few months later, we finally got on the phone together and we spoke for the first time, which was amazing. But for some reason, I said to her, I don't want to know what you look like until we meet in person.
Hmm.
And years went by. We were going to meet right before COVID happened. And then when COVID happened, everything got delayed. But once COVID opened up, we ended up meeting. And this woman has just been an incredible part of my life. So we ended up meeting in person for the first time. I think it was in 2021. The week before we met, we were supposed to meet on one day. Then she said, "Oh, I can't go home. I have to book and meet a week later." And I said, "A week later?" I said, "That's my mother's birthday." She
Hmm.
said, "That's my mother's birthday."
Wow.
So we both have our mothers share the same birthday. And then right before my mom passed in 2021, I, even though I had spoke to her, Mrs. Hanson, around the time that my mother was in the room, I never showed each other's faces, but I introduced them in September, and it would happen to be less than 2 weeks before my mom passed away. And it was almost like it was a handoff from
Yeah.
one mother to another. And so I called this woman my second mom,
Hmm.
and she has supported me through a lot of incredible things. And I supported her as well. I didn't realize it at the time that I was supporting her too. But the point in telling this sort of extended story is that you never know the impact of your positive contributions to the world and the things that you put out there. You never know who's paying attention and who might benefit from it. And you might benefit by it too by making these human connections. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to be authentic, be vulnerable, be positive, and be your true self because your journey is helping others because we're collectively working together and going through this thing called life.
For sure. That is such a powerful story. I love that you were able to connect with her, and I'm sure that really blessed her so much. And both of you guys have been a blessing to each other. Um, that is awesome. Let me ask you one more thing. So the people that are watching right now and they may be going through workplace bullying, they maybe have just walked away from a situation and they're looking for other employment and they're trying to basically find their way forward. Um, for employers, this is key. What are some things employers can do to protect their employees from experiencing this? Because I feel like this is something that happens so often, and then employers, they sit there and they're like, "Duh, we don't know why all our employees are leaving all of a sudden." And it's almost like gaslighting because it's like they're trying to act like they're the victim of everyone's leaving instead of trying to get to the source of why everyone is leaving. What are some things that you feel could be done to help employers, I'm sorry, support employees in preventing workplace bullying?
Well, first, we don't give power to anyone else.
Yeah.
First, we have to claim our own power. And when something is not right, we need to speak up. If
Mhm.
we speak up and action is not being taken after taking reasonable actions, then you have to make a decision to walk away.
Mhm.
But you also need to make sure that the organization knows about the things that are going on. A lot of
Yes.
times, individuals are not willing to share the true sources of the reasons that they're leaving because they want to leave the door open. They want to get a good reference. But an organization that's really and truly committed to a healthy work environment is going to want to know these things because oftentimes people leaving can be attributed to an individual or individuals within an organization.
Yeah.
And too often, individuals who are considered high performers or assets to the organization for whatever reason are given a pass where
Yeah.
others aren't. So
Mhm.
where there's issues, organizations need to address those in a timely manner so that their employees, their most valuable assets, are being protected.
Yeah.
You can't look the other way just because someone is delivering good results. If you're and if the individuals who are bullying in the organization are preventing others from having healthy work environments, regardless of the results that are being created by your quote unquote superstars, then
Yeah.
you need to re-examine the organization, its culture, its purpose, and the individuals that are within the organization to make sure that they're all in alignment. Because if you allow workplace bullies to run without consequences, then that says a lot about you and the organization than the person who is actually doing the bullying because they're getting a pass to do things that you probably otherwise say are unacceptable.
Yeah. I totally agree. I feel like there should be a way for people to anonymously report things, in
Most
real
organizations
time.
have that.
Some,
Most
yeah,
organizations.
but I feel like either if they have it, they're not adequately using it or something. There's a disconnect somewhere because of how commonplace this is. I even see this in churches. Like a few church bullies in high positions, just being controlling and manipulative, and nobody says anything because this person is so high up the chain, nothing's gonna get done about it. They're in tight with the pastor. If I say something, nobody will ever believe me. And then you have people leaving the church in droves over two or three overbearing people. You know what I mean? Like, it happens across multiple industries. So if somebody is not comfortable confronting a person directly, like there should be some kind of, I don't know, Dropbox or some kind of anonymous thing where people can write and just be like, "Hey, um, this is happening, this is going on," and give the person time to address it. But then I'm like you, if it's not addressed, if you said your piece and nothing is happening, then you're worth more than any paycheck.
That's true. But on the other side of that, there's two things that allow workplace bullies to sort of reign over any environment.
Mm,
One is culture.
yeah,
And if the culture allows it, if it's permissive, then it's going to happen.
yeah,
But any culture that's developed is a result of individuals within the culture.
mm,
So you might have two or three individuals that might be the bullies, if you will, or the harassers, if you will. but you also have other individuals within the organization that too often don't work together to
Yeah.
address issues
Mm.
because depending on the person's power in the organization, they can make their lives miserable.
Yeah.
Well, bottom line is you can either be miserable and stay, be miserable and leave, or if you like the environment that you're in, if you really care about it enough, you can at least attempt to organize with others. Because if you end up being on the out anyway, that's probably where you were going to go if the issues weren't addressed.
Yeah.
So, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
Peace of mind is priceless.
Mm. Peace of mind is priceless. Okay, so what about some people that are kind of like, I think my workplace may be toxic, but I don't know for sure. What would you say are three or four things that you can think of that are some telltale signs that you're in a toxic workplace?
Well, what I would rather reframe that is if something isn't happening the way that I expect it to, and is one, what's going on?
Hmm.
Are my expectations reasonable?
Hmm.
Have I taken action or actions to address my concerns?
Hmm.
And what am I willing to give up if the environment doesn't change?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
we have to analyze the situation, but we also ultimately need to understand what are we willing to put up with? Because a
Yeah.
lot of times we're willing to put up with a lot more mess than we should.
Hmm.
And at one seminar I was speaking at, I was talking about ethics. And one of the guys raised his hand and he said, well, it's easy for you to say. He goes, I don't know your situation, but when you have a family, you just can't just walk away from a job.
Hmm.
And my response was, okay, you said you have children. How old are they? And I believe they were around the teenage years or close to it.
Hmm.
I said, what do you tell them about doing the right thing? He
Hmm.
says, well, I tell them to do the right thing. So aren't you being a little disingenuous if you're telling them to do the right things, but you're not willing to?
Hmm.
So if you're telling them to do the right things, but you're not willing to do the right things and walk away when you're being told to do the wrong things, then why are you telling your children these things?
Yeah.
So you have to be able to be comfortable with who you are, what you believe, and if it's a positive position, and take action to drive changes.
Yeah.
Don't settle because this isn't a practice run that we have in this thing called life.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to step up because sometimes when you step up, it might lead to you stepping out and stepping into your destiny.
Hmm.
So be comfortable with yourself. Don't allow yourself to be diminished by others' needs to seek power or control over you. So stand up for yourself.
I love that. Love it. Love it. You guys, we also have some additional tips. We have a quiz that you all can take. If you head over to Victorious Living Solutions/toxic, you can take the Is My Relationship Toxic quiz. And it's good for any toxic relationships you may be experiencing. So head on over there and give your email address and you'll get your free download of that quiz. I love those things that you said, Dr. S.L. Young. And this has been fabulous. Tell us what you're working on and how we can stay connected with you.
Well, I'm working on peace, patience, and prosperity. So I'm
Hey,
working on my peace.
I
and
love
s-
it.
and so really I'm just seeking to elevate the rest of my life as I have been doing over the last few years, and really working with individuals to transform their lives to achieve the things that they might have not have believed were possible for them. So folks can keep up with me and connect with me at slyoung.com and also at my for-profit company Beyond SPRH at beyondsprh.com, or also check out Saving Our Communities at Risk through educational services, finally called Socrates at
Mhm.
SOCARTES.org. But I really want to work with others to live better lives and make a difference for the rest of my days.
I think you are doing a fantabulous job at that, and I will be keeping
Well,
up with
thanks.
you. I hope you guys go follow him on all platforms as well. Thank you so much for sharing your powerful story with us.
All right, great. Thank you so much.